This is the story of a millionaire's son who cried endlessly, and no one could calm him until a little girl did the unthinkable. But what did she do that shocked everyone? And why couldn't wealth, doctors, or even his own family bring him peace? Stay with me, because over the next hour, you'll see how a child's innocence broke through silence, revealed a secret no one imagined, and changed everything. In the heart of the city, past towering skyscrapers and busy avenues, sat the Sterling estate. It was impossible to miss. Iron gates taller than most houses guarded the entrance. Behind them stretched lush gardens with fountains, statues, and flowers imported from overseas. At the center stood the mansion, glass windows like mirrors, marble walls that gleamed under the sunlight, and a driveway large enough to host a dozen cars. For most, it was the kind of home they'd only ever see in glossy magazines. Inside lived Daniel Sterling, a man whose name commanded respect in the business world. At just 45, he had built an empire in finance, real estate, and technology. His suits were tailored in Milan, his watches crafted in Switzerland, and his voice carried the calm authority of someone used to winning. By his side was Helena, his wife. She was admired everywhere she went, elegant, poised, and graceful, with a beauty that graced charity covers and gala photographs. To many, the Sterlings were untouchable, a symbol of wealth, influence, and power. And then there was Ethan, their only child, a boy with wide brown eyes, curly hair that never seemed to stay in place, and a smile so pure that it could melt even the coldest heart. But there was one problem. Ethan hardly ever smiled. From the moment Ethan was a toddler, he cried more than other children. At first, Daniel and Helena dismissed it. Babies cried, toddlers fussed. Everyone assured them he'd grow out of it. But as Ethan grew older, his crying didn't stop. In fact, it became worse. By the time he was 5, the mansion echoed daily with his sobs. They weren't the small whimpers of a child who wanted a toy or was refusing bedtime. These were deep, aching cries that lasted for hours. Cries that tore through walls, shook Helena's heart, and left Daniel pacing the floors late into the night. No one could explain why. Nannies came and went, each one leaving within weeks. "He doesn't stop," they would say, exhaustion written across their faces. "I've tried everything, singing, reading, playing. Nothing helps." Doctors were called. Specialists were flown in from across the country. Therapists designed programs, nutritionists crafted special diets, neurologists conducted brain scans. But test after test, visit after visit yielded the same result. "We can't find anything wrong." Yet every day, Ethan cried. From the outside, neighbors only saw the glamorous side of the Sterlings. Black-tinted cars sweeping through the gates, gala dresses, awards ceremonies, and charity speeches. But those who worked inside the mansion knew the truth. The once vibrant home had become a place of quiet despair. Curtains often remained closed. Staff tiptoed through the halls, doing their best to avoid the sound of Ethan's sobs. Helena, once the perfect hostess, often retreated into her room, clutching tissues, trying to compose herself. Daniel, the titan of business, found himself powerless in his own home. In boardrooms, he could negotiate billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But at night, sitting by his son's bedside, he felt helpless. The crying wasn't just breaking their hearts, it was breaking their image. Rumors began spreading among friends and associates. Why don't we see them anymore? Why does Helena always look so tired? Is something wrong with their son? To protect their reputation, the Sterlings withdrew from society. Invitations went unanswered. Public appearances became rare. Slowly, the glamorous couple disappeared from the spotlight, becoming ghosts in their own mansion. For Helena, the cries of her son pierced deeper than anything else. She had grown up dreaming of being a mother, of baking cookies, of bedtime stories, of laughter filling her home. Instead, every day was filled with Ethan's uncontrollable sobs. She spent hours by his side, holding him, rocking him, whispering lullabies in his ear. Sometimes he would quiet for a moment, leaning into her shoulder, but then, just as quickly, the tears would return. She started avoiding mirrors. The once polished woman that graced magazine covers now carried shadows under her eyes, her once bright smile replaced with exhaustion. Daniel dealt with Ethan's crying differently. Where she wept, he worked. He buried himself in meetings, conferences, and projects. If he wasn't in the office, he was on his phone, chasing deals that distracted him from the sound echoing through his home. But no matter how much he worked, he couldn't escape it. Sometimes in the middle of a presentation, he would hear Ethan's cry in his head. At night, even in his office far from Ethan's room, the sound carried through the walls. And though he didn't admit it, the crying scared him. Daniel Sterling was a man used to solutions, a man who believed money could fix anything. Yet here was a problem he couldn't solve, no matter how many checks he wrote. It shook him, made him feel powerless, and deep down, it frightened him, because he was supposed to protect his family. And what about Ethan? To the world, he was the difficult child, the boy who couldn't be calmed. But inside, Ethan was simply misunderstood. He wasn't spoiled, he wasn't stubborn, he wasn't broken. He was trapped. Trapped in a world where the people around him didn't understand what he was trying to say. He cried not because he wanted to, but because it was the only way he knew to express the storm of feelings inside him. And each time adults rushed to quiet him, to distract him, to shush him, the wall between them grew taller. All Ethan wanted was for someone to hear him. By the time Ethan turned 6, the Sterling mansion had become a prison of sound. To guests, it looked beautiful. Sparkling chandeliers, golden staircases, and flawless interiors. But to those who lived inside, it was haunted by the echo of a boy's cries. Helena prayed every night. Daniel kept searching for experts. Ethan cried himself to sleep, and the staff whispered in silence, wondering how long this could go on. The Sterlings were at the edge of despair. They had money, power, influence, everything people dreamed of. But what good was any of it when they couldn't give their son peace? And then, just when they began to lose hope, fate intervened. One day, an unexpected visitor stepped into the mansion. Not a doctor, not a therapist, not a specialist with degrees on the wall, but a little girl. An ordinary child with an extraordinary gift. And in her hands, she carried the key to unlocking Ethan's world. Fade out, music softens, narrator pauses. This was the moment everything began to change.
The Sterlings had always believed that every problem had a solution. If there was a challenge in business, Daniel solved it with strategy. If there was a social issue, Helena used her influence and grace to fix it. So when Ethan's cries continued day after day, they did what they knew best. They sought help. The finest, The most expensive, the most respected. Doctors were flown in from New York, London, Paris. Appointments were booked months in advance and then rushed forward when Daniel pulled strings. They spared no expense. Each specialist arrived confident. They walked through the towering doors, greeted by marble floors and anxious parents. They examined Ethan, took notes, ran tests. Helena would sit on the edge of her chair, clutching her hands, waiting for an answer. But each time, the verdict was the same. He's healthy. There's nothing physically wrong. He's just emotional. Words that felt like knives. If he was healthy, why did he cry so much? If nothing was wrong, why couldn't he stop? The Sterlings didn't stop at doctors. They tried therapists, specialists in child psychology, experts in behavior. Some came with toys, some with games, some with charts and structured routines. At first, Helena and Daniel were hopeful. They watched as strangers try to connect with their son. They waited for results. But Ethan never responded the way they expected. One therapist suggested play therapy. He just needs expression, she said. She filled a room with blocks, paints, stuffed animals. Ethan cried through it all. Another specialist suggested stricter discipline. Don't give in, he said. He's manipulating you with his tears. Daniel clenched his jaw but followed the program. Days turned into weeks. Nothing changed. Then came the nutritionist. Maybe it's his diet, she explained, handing over an elaborate plan full of organic foods and rare supplements. Helena cooked every meal by hand, desperate to see a difference. But still, the cries continued. Every attempt ended in disappointment. Every method a dead end. The Sterling mansion, once filled with laughter, now echoed with exhaustion. Staff who once admired the family grew weary. Some left in tears. Others quit without notice. I can't handle it, one nanny whispered, packing her bags after only 2 weeks. It's too much. Another shook her head, eyes heavy with guilt. I've cared for dozens of children. I've never seen anything like this. Even the security guards, men trained to handle emergencies, looked drained after long nights listening to the cries reverberate through the halls. The mansion had become a cage, not a home. Every chandelier, every polished marble step, every imported vase felt meaningless against the sound of Ethan's pain. Helena was unraveling. She tried to remain graceful in public, but behind closed doors, she wept. Sometimes she sat outside Ethan's room with her head pressed against the door, tears streaming down her face as his sobs filled the air. She questioned her worth. What kind of mother am I if I can't soothe my own child? Her friends stopped visiting. At first, they came with sympathy. They offered advice, books, recommendations. But as time passed, they grew distant. Some didn't understand. Others whispered behind her back. Helena Sterling can't even control her child, they said, unaware of the depth of her pain. For Helena, the isolation cut deeper than any gossip. She didn't care about her reputation anymore. She cared about Ethan, about the little boy who looked at her with pleading eyes she couldn't understand. Daniel faced a crisis differently. He buried himself in work. From dawn until late night, he sat in his office, poring over contracts, attending meetings, and flying across the country. He told himself he was doing it for his family, that by keeping his business empire strong, he was protecting them. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was running. Running from the cries he couldn't stop. Running from the helplessness he felt every time he saw his son's tears. Running from the guilt of not being able to fix what money couldn't buy. When Helena confronted him late one night, her voice cracked with exhaustion. You're never here. You don't hear him the way I do. Daniel snapped, his voice louder than he intended. What do you want me to do? I've brought every doctor, every specialist, every program. Nothing works. The argument left them both in tears. For the first time in their marriage, their bond felt fragile. not because of lack of love, but because of the crushing weight of despair. Despite their best efforts to hide it, whispers spread. Daniel began missing key events. Helena stopped attending social gatherings. At charity galas, people noticed her distant eyes. At board meetings, they saw Daniel's tired face. Reporters speculated. Was there trouble in the Sterling marriage? Was Daniel ill? Why had they retreated from the spotlight? The media never learned the truth, but gossip has a way of cutting deeper than fact. The Sterlings felt trapped not just by Ethan's cries, but by the world's watchful eyes. And through it all, Ethan remained alone. To adults, his cries were noise, but to Ethan, they were his only voice. He wasn't trying to annoy. He wasn't trying to manipulate. He was trying to speak in the only way he could. Sometimes when no one was watching, he would curl into a corner, covering his ears, shutting out the world. His tears weren't just sadness, they were frustration. The frustration of a boy who had so much to say, but no way to say it. If someone had looked closer, if someone had paused long enough to see beyond the tears, they might have noticed the way his eyes lit up when people used their hands, the way he turned toward movement, not sound. But in the chaos of wealth, reputation, and endless solutions, nobody noticed. By now, years of failed attempts had left the Sterlings raw. Their home was no longer a place of safety, but a constant reminder of their failure. Helena prayed every night, begging for relief. Daniel searched endlessly, clinging to the hope that the next doctor, the next program, the next breakthrough would solve it. But nothing did. The Sterlings began to wonder if this was their life forever. Endless crying, endless searching, endless despair. And then, when they were ready to give up, the answer walked through their doors, uninvited, unexpected, and completely ordinary. One morning, Helena's housekeeper arrived as usual, but this time she wasn't alone. With her was her daughter, a little girl named Lily. She had no degrees, no titles, no wealth, just a pair of curious eyes and a gentle spirit. And though the Sterlings didn't know it yet, Lily carried within her the one thing that could silence the cries that had haunted their home for years. The unthinkable was about to happen.
The Sterling mansion was a masterpiece of architecture. Towering ceilings, golden chandeliers, rooms large enough to swallow entire apartments. But all of it felt hollow. The sound of Ethan's cries had seeped into every corner, every wall. It was like a ghost haunting the halls, inescapable, suffocating. Even when he wasn't crying, the silence that followed was heavy with the anticipation of when it would start again. The staff moved with caution, afraid to trigger another episode. The gardeners clipped the hedges in silence. The chef cooked in near darkness late at night, hoping to avoid the hours when Ethan's cries echoed the loudest. It was as if the entire house breathed with Ethan. Every gasp, every cry, every broken sob shaping the rhythm of daily life. Helena, once radiant and admired, began to fade. Her reflection told the truth no makeup could hide. Sleepless nights, red eyes, and the exhaustion of a mother who had tried everything. She stopped attending luncheons with friends. She ignored invitations to charity events she once hosted with pride. Her world shrank to the size of her son's cries. Sometimes she would collapse on the floor outside Ethan's door, clutching his baby blanket to her chest, whispering prayers. Please, God, let him find peace. Please, let me hear his laughter just once. But the prayers always ended the same way, drowned out by more tears. Helena no longer dreamed of luxury or status. All she wanted was to hear her child's voice. Clear, joyful, free from pain. Daniel fought his battles differently. Outwardly, he remained the powerful tycoon, running board meetings, signing contracts, making headlines. But inside, he was unraveling. The cries followed him. He'd be in a boardroom discussing millions when suddenly he'd hear Ethan's sobs in his head. At night, he drank whiskey in silence, staring at the glowing city skyline through his office window, wondering what kind of father he really was. Daniel hated feeling powerless. In his world, every problem had a solution: money, influence, connections. But here he was, the father of a boy whose tears he couldn't stop. And so he worked more, traveled more, and distanced himself from home. To outsiders, it looked like ambition. To Helena, it felt like abandonment. Their marriage, once filled with warmth, was now strained. Conversations turned into arguments. Arguments turned into silence. And through it all, Ethan kept crying. When the Sterlings withdrew from social life, the whispers began. At first, people were sympathetic. They said, parenting is hard. Maybe Ethan is just sensitive. But as months passed, sympathy turned to curiosity. Curiosity became gossip. Some speculated Ethan was spoiled. Others claimed the Sterlings were hiding a shameful family secret. Tabloid headlines asked cruel questions. Is Sterling's son troubled? Perfect family crumbling? Helena avoided the news altogether. Daniel ordered his PR team to silence rumors. But no press release, no crafted statement, no polished photograph could erase the truth inside the mansion. Behind closed doors, the Sterlings were breaking. And what about Ethan? To outsiders, he was the crying boy. To his parents, he was a mystery. But inside his small body was a storm no one could see. He wasn't crying for attention. He wasn't trying to manipulate. He was crying because the world around him was foreign, confusing, and unreachable. Ethan noticed things adults didn't. The way lips moved without meaning. The way sounds blurred together into nothingness. He felt the vibrations of footsteps more than the words they spoke. But no one understood. No one realized that Ethan wasn't ignoring them. He simply couldn't hear them. And so he cried. Cried out of frustration, out of loneliness, out of the desperate hope that someone, anyone, would finally hear him, not with their ears, but with their hearts. The breaking point came one winter evening. Ethan had cried for nearly 6 hours straight. Helena was on the floor by his bed, rocking him, whispering, sobbing with him. Daniel stood in the doorway, his fists clenched. Finally, he snapped. "This can't go on," he shouted. His voice was louder than he intended, sharp enough to make Helena flinch. Helena turned, her face streaked with tears. "He's our son, Daniel. What do you want me to do? Give up?" The words cut deep. Daniel stormed out, retreating into his office, slamming the door behind him. Helena held Ethan tighter, trembling. That night, the mansion felt colder than ever, not because of the winter outside, but because of the distance growing inside. Not far from the mansion, In a modest neighborhood with cracked sidewalks and small houses lined close together lived Lily. She was 7 years old. Her clothes weren't designer, her toys weren't imported, but she had something far greater, a heart full of empathy. She had grown up surrounded by people who worked hard for little. She saw her mother juggle jobs to provide. She played with neighborhood kids who shared what little they had. And most importantly, she had a neighbor who was deaf. From that neighbor, Lily had learned the basics of sign language. Simple words, simple gestures. To her, it was just another way of talking, no more unusual than speaking English or Spanish. She didn't know it yet, but that simple skill would make her the bridge between Ethan's silence and the world he desperately wanted to join. One morning, Helena's housekeeper was called in early. She usually worked quietly, cleaning corners of the mansion, keeping herself unnoticed. But that day, she couldn't find anyone to watch her daughter. And so, for the first time, Lily walked through the sterling gates. Her wide eyes took in the fountains, the towering walls, the glittering chandeliers. To her, it looked like a castle out of a fairy tale. But soon, her ears caught something that shattered the illusion. The unmistakable sound of a child crying. She followed the sound to a room lined with toys more expensive than anything she had ever seen. And there, in the center of it all, sat Ethan, curled up, tears streaming down his face, alone in a palace of plenty. Lily's heart ached. She didn't rush to him like the adults. She didn't shush him. She didn't scold. She just sat down. And in that quiet moment, something extraordinary was about to happen. The Sterlings had searched the world for answers. They had spent millions. They had exhausted every possibility. But the answer wasn't in hospitals, specialists, or programs. It was in the hands of a little girl with no title, no wealth, no fame. And in just a few minutes, she would do what no one else could. She would change Ethan's life forever. The Sterling estate had seen hundreds of guests over the years. Politicians, business magnates, celebrities. But never before had its golden gates opened for someone like Lily. She was small, her shoes scuffed from playground games, her hair tied in a messy braid. She clutched her mother's hand as they walked across the marble floors. Her wide eyes scanned the chandelier above, the shimmering walls, the endless hallways. To Lily, it felt like stepping into another world, one where everything sparkled, but also one that seemed lonely. Her mother whispered, "Stay close, sweetheart. I'll only be working for a few hours." Lily nodded, trying to keep quiet, but her ears quickly picked up the sound that no one could ignore, Ethan's cries echoing down the hallway. Her steps slowed, her eyes softened. Something inside her tugged. Lily peeked around a heavy oak doorframe. Inside was a room overflowing with toys. Plush animals, trains, blocks, cars, everything a child could want, except peace. In the center sat Ethan. His face was red, streaked with tears. He clutched his knees, rocking back and forth, crying as though the whole world had turned its back on him. Helena sat nearby, exhausted, her hands trembling as she tried once again to soothe him. She whispered, she hugged, she sang, but Ethan pushed her away, his sobs rising louder. Her heart ached. She didn't see a millionaire's son. She didn't see privilege or wealth. She just saw a little boy who was hurting. Helena noticed Lily in the doorway.
Normally, she would have sent a servant's child away, embarrassed by the chaos, but that day she was too drained to protest. Lily hesitated, then took a small step inside. Her shoes made a tiny squeak against the polished floor. Ethan's tear-filled eyes darted to her. For a moment, his cries slowed, confusion flashing across his face. No adult had ever come into his room without shushing, without hovering. But this was a child, closer to his age, someone different. Lily didn't rush to him. She didn't crowd him. Instead, she sat down on the floor, far enough to give him space, close enough to show she wasn't afraid. Her small voice broke the silence. "Hi." Ethan blinked. He didn't respond, of course, but he didn't cry louder either. Lily thought back to her neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, who was deaf. She remembered how they had communicated not with sounds, but with hands. How sometimes just a smile and a simple gesture could mean more than 1,000 words. Slowly, she raised her hands. Carefully, she signed the word friend. Ethan froze. His wet eyes widened. His little body, tense from hours of sobbing, suddenly stilled. No adult had ever come into his room without shushing, without hovering. But this was a child, closer to his age. Someone different. Lily didn't rush to him. She didn't crowd him. Instead, she sat down on the floor, far enough to give him space, close enough to show she wasn't afraid. Her small voice broke the silence. "Hi." Ethan blinked. He didn't respond, of course, but he didn't cry louder either. Lily thought back to her neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, who was deaf. She remembered how they had communicated not with sounds, but with hands. How sometimes just a smile and a simple gesture could mean more than 1,000 words. Slowly, she raised her hands. Carefully, she signed the word friend. Ethan froze. His wet eyes widened. His little body, tense from hours of sobbing, suddenly stilled. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. Not with words that felt empty, but with movements he could understand. He stared at Lily's hands. She repeated the sign, slower this time, smiling softly. Friend. For the first time in hours, maybe days, Ethan's cries faltered. His lips trembled, but no sound came. He was watching. Helena gasped, covering her mouth. She had seen doctors fail, teachers quit, therapists shake their heads, but here, in her son's room, an ordinary girl was doing something extraordinary. She leaned forward, afraid to break the moment. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Oh my God." Her heart pounded. Could this be it? Could this be the answer they had searched for all along? Lily shuffled a little closer. She signed another word, play. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small toy car she had brought with her, worn and scratched, but loved. She rolled it gently across the floor toward Ethan. The boy stared at it. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and touched it. It was such a small gesture, just a tiny hand on a toy. But to Helena, it was like witnessing a miracle. For the first time, Ethan wasn't pushing someone away. He wasn't drowning in tears. He was engaging. And it wasn't because of money or status or expertise. It was because of a little girl who understood him in a way no one else had. Ethan looked up at Lily again. His eyes, still wet, seemed to search her face for something. Acceptance, understanding, safety. Lily gave a soft nod, her smile never fading. She signed again. Friend. This time, Ethan's tiny hand lifted shakily. He tried to mimic her gesture. His fingers weren't perfect, but the intention was clear. Friend. Helena gasped audibly as her knees gave way as she sank into a chair. She pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming freely now. Her son, her silent, unreachable son, had just spoken back, not with words, but with a sign. With hope. The air in the room changed. the tension, the despair, the heaviness, it all seemed to lift. For a moment, it wasn't a room of endless crying. It wasn't a prison of silence. It was a space of connection where two children had bridged an impossible gap with nothing more than hands and hearts. Ethan wasn't cured. His struggles weren't over, but something had shifted. He had been reached. And for Helena, it felt like the first glimpse of light after years of darkness. Lily didn't see what she had done as a miracle. To her, it was natural. People needed friends. People needed kindness. And if Ethan couldn't hear words, then she would use her hands instead. She played with him quietly, signing simple words she remembered. Toy, happy, share. Ethan didn't get them all, but he watched, fascinated. For the first time, his tears dried. Helena sat in stunned silence, watching every second. The little girl her housekeeper had brought by accident was accomplishing what millions of dollars and dozens of professionals could not. When Lily's mother came to collect her later, Helena grabbed her hand, her voice trembling. Please, please bring her again. She's the only one who's reached him. Lily's mother, startled, looked at her daughter, then back at Helena. Of course, if you think it helps. Helena nodded, her tears unstoppable. It doesn't just help, it's hope. That night, the Sterling mansion was different. For the first time in years, Ethan slept peacefully, clutching the little toy car Lily had given him. Helena stayed by his side, whispering prayers of gratitude. She didn't know what the future would hold. She didn't know if this was just a fleeting moment or the beginning of something greater. But she did know one thing. Their lives had changed forever. And it was all because of a little girl who had walked into their world by chance and chosen to see Ethan not as a problem to be solved, but as a friend to be understood.
The next morning in the Sterling mansion began like so many others. Tension in the air, exhaustion written on Helena's face, silence between her and Daniel. But one thing was different. Ethan hadn't cried all night. For the first time in years, he had drifted into sleep peacefully, clutching Lily's toy car. Helena barely dared to believe it. Was it just chance? A coincidence? Or had the little girl really reached him in a way no one else could? She didn't have to wait long for her answer. Later that day, the housekeeper arrived with Lily again. Helena was already waiting at the door. Her eyes softened as she bent down. "Thank you for coming back, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling with both gratitude and disbelief. Lily shrugged innocently. "I wanted to see him." The simplicity of the words broke Helena's heart. For all the millions she had spent, for all the professionals she had hired, the solution had come from a child's pure heart. She led Lily upstairs. Ethan was awake, sitting in the corner of his room, clutching the toy car. His face still held sadness, but when his eyes met Lily's, something changed. His little hands tightened around the car. He remembered her. And, most importantly, he trusted her. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor. Slowly, patiently, she began signing words she knew. Play. Car. Happy. Ethan's eyes widened. His breathing quickened. He wasn't just watching. He was understanding. He crawled closer, his tears forgotten, his gaze locked on her hands. Then, with shaky determination, he lifted his own little hands and tried to copy. His fingers fumbled, but the meaning was there. Play. It was the first clear communication Ethan had ever shared. Helena gasped. Her knees nearly gave way. She gripped the bedpost to steady herself as tears poured down her cheeks. Daniel, drawn by the noise, stepped into the doorway. His eyes widened as he saw his son signing back. "What's happening?" he whispered. Helena turned, her voice breaking. He's talking to her, Daniel. With his hands." Lily's face lit up. She repeated the sign slowly. Play.
car, happy. Ethan copied again, this time more confidently. His lips curved just slightly into a smile. It was the first smile his parents had seen in months. Helena covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. Daniel, who had stood frozen for so long, suddenly stepped forward. His powerful frame seemed small, vulnerable. "My boy," his voice cracked. "He understands." Ethan looked at his father, but didn't cry. For once, he didn't push him away. Instead, he turned back to Lily, reaching out to roll the toy car across the floor. Lily giggled softly, clapping her hands once. "Good job," she said, even though Ethan couldn't hear her voice. She signed it instead. Good, happy. Ethan beamed. His tears had turned into laughter, silent but radiant. The staff gathered quietly at the door, peeking in. Word spread throughout the mansion like fire. "The boy isn't crying. He's playing. He's smiling." For years, the sound of his cries had been the mansion's constant soundtrack, but now the sound of quiet joy, of peace, filled the air. Helena collapsed into Daniel's arms, whispering, "Do you see this? Do you finally see it?" And Daniel, the man who once thought money could buy any solution, could only nod, speechless. Over the next hour, Lily taught Ethan more signs, simple words at first. Friend, toy, eat, love. Each time Ethan copied her, his confidence grew. Each time his parents saw it, their hearts swelled. For the first time, Ethan had way to express himself. His endless crying had never been meaningless. It had been the only way he knew to scream his frustration into a world that didn't understand him. But now, with Lily's help, he had a voice, and that changed everything. Daniel, who had once dismissed Ethan's condition as a problem to be fixed with wealth, felt a shift deep inside him. He sank onto his knees beside his son, tears in his eyes. "I didn't know, Ethan. I didn't know you were trying to tell us all this time." He reached out, trembling, and signed a word Lily showed him: love. Ethan looked at his father, then repeated it: love. Daniel broke. For the first time in his adult life, the powerful tycoon sobbed openly, not out of frustration, but out of relief. Helena turned to Lily, her hands shaking. "Sweetheart, do you know what you've done? You've given us our son back." Lily tilted her head, innocent and pure. "I just wanted him to feel better." She pulled her into a hug, whispering, "You are a gift, an absolute gift." Later that evening, as the Sterlings gathered in the living room, the staff whispered among themselves. They had seen the boy's suffering, endured the endless crying, and pitied the family who seemed untouchable yet broken. But now, watching Ethan sit quietly beside Lily, learning, smiling, communicating, they were in awe. It wasn't wealth that had saved him. It wasn't experts or medicine. It was kindness, innocence, love. And that realization spread through the household like light chasing away shadows. The Sterlings tried to keep the breakthrough private, but in their world, secrets never stayed hidden for long. Soon word spread among family and friends. Ethan had changed. He was calmer. He was happier. He was finally communicating. At dinner parties and charity galas, people whispered about the miracle. How had it happened? Who had healed the boy? When the truth emerged, that it wasn't money but a poor little girl who had reached him, people were stunned. Some refused to believe it, others were humbled. But for Daniel and Helena, it didn't matter what anyone thought. They had their son back. As the days passed, Ethan and Lily grew inseparable. She visited often, teaching him more signs, playing with him, showing him that silence wasn't loneliness, it was just another way to live. Ethan began to sign his feelings, his needs, his joys.
His tears became rarer, his laughter more common. The mansion, once haunted by cries, was now alive with hope. And all because of the little girl who had done the unthinkable. One evening, as Helena tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. His hands moved slowly, carefully forming a sign she hadn't seen before. She turned to Lily, who whispered the translation. Her heart stopped. Her son had just signed one word he had never spoken before. Mother. Helena collapsed beside him, sobbing tears of joy. And with that single sign, she knew their lives would never be the same again.
Helena sat frozen on the edge of Ethan's bed, her son's tiny hands still resting in the air after forming the word mother. It was clumsy, imperfect, but it was real. Her throat tightened as sobs broke free, sobs not of despair, but of joy so overwhelming it made her shake. She leaned down, cradling Ethan in her arms, whispering, "I hear you, sweetheart. I finally hear you." For years, she had begged for a miracle, and here it was, in the form of a single, silent word. Daniel stood at the doorway, unable to move. He had seen billion-dollar mergers, survived corporate battles, and commanded boardrooms with ease. But nothing had ever undone him like this moment. He wiped his face roughly with his hand, embarrassed by his tears, yet powerless to stop them. His son had reached out, not with cries, but with a connection that had eluded them for years. And it hadn't been doctors or therapists who made it happen. It was Lily. A little girl with no wealth, no power, no agenda, just kindness. The realization cut deep. For so long, Daniel had believed money could fix everything. Now, standing there, he felt smaller than ever. Later that evening, after Ethan had drifted into peaceful sleep, Helena and Daniel sat in the dimly lit study. The fire crackled softly between them. Helena broke the silence first. "He's been crying all these years because we weren't speaking his language." Daniel buried his face in his hands. "I thought we were doing everything, the best schools, the best doctors, the best specialists. But all the while, he was begging for someone to just understand him." Helena's voice trembled. "And a child did what we couldn't?" The words stung, but Daniel nodded. "Then we owe her everything." For the first time in years, their eyes met without anger, without blame. For the first time, they were united in hope. The next morning, Helena arranged for a specialist in child communication to visit again, but this time armed with a new perspective. The woman watched Ethan carefully as Lily signed to him. Then she turned to Helena with certainty in her eyes. "Your son isn't broken. He isn't unreachable. He's death." The words landed with both weight and relief. Helena gasped, covering her mouth. Daniel gripped the arm of his chair. Deaf. All these years, Ethan hadn't ignored them, hadn't rejected them. He had simply lived in a world of silence. His cries had been his only way of screaming out for connection. And now, thanks to Lily, the truth was clear. Helena collapsed into tears. "All this time, I thought he hated me. I thought I was failing him as a mother." The specialist placed a gentle hand on her shoulder.
You didn't fail him. You just didn't know how to listen. Daniel sat stiffly, his jaw tight, his eyes burning. He thought of the nights he had left the mansion, drowning himself in work, blaming Ethan for the cracks in their family. He thought of the times he had tried to silence his son with money, with toys, with distractions. And all along, Ethan had just needed someone to speak his language. The guilt crushed him, but alongside the guilt was something else. Determination. "This ends now," Daniel said firmly. "From today forward, we learn his language. We give him everything he needs, not doctors to fix him, but tools to understand him." Helena nodded, wiping her tears. For the first time, their path was clear. Lily continued visiting almost daily. Each time she taught Ethan new signs. His progress was astonishing. He signed eat when he was hungry, play when he wanted company, love when he hugged his mother. The boy who had once been defined by endless tears was now blossoming into someone vibrant, expressive, alive. And every time Helena watched, her gratitude towards Lily deepened. She often found herself kneeling to the little girl, tears in her eyes, whispering, thank you for giving me back my son." But Lily only smiled shyly and said, "He just needed a friend." One evening, Daniel sat with Lily in the study, a notebook open in front of him. "Teach me," he said quietly. Lily grinned and began showing him the basics. His large hands fumbled at first, awkward and clumsy. But he kept trying. She corrected him patiently, laughing when he got it wrong, encouraging him when he got it right. Hours passed, and by the end, Daniel could sign 3 words confidently: father, love, and proud. The next morning, he sat beside Ethan at breakfast. Slowly, carefully, he signed father, proud. Ethan froze, staring at his father's hands. Then his face broke into a radiant smile. For the first time, Ethan saw his father, not as a stranger speaking meaningless sounds, but as someone reaching into his silent world. And Daniel felt a joy deeper than any business victory he had ever known. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the Sterling mansion changed completely. Where once there had been tension and despair, now there was laughter, even if silent. Where once the halls echoed with cries, now they resonated with connection. The staff noticed. They no longer tiptoed nervously. They smiled as they passed Ethan, who waved to them with signs. He had learned. The boy who had once seemed unreachable was now lighting up every corner of the house. And the miracle hadn't come from wealth. It had come from a child who had walked in by accident. Of course, word eventually spread. The Sterlings couldn't hide forever. Family friends came to visit and were stunned to see Ethan smiling, communicating, thriving. At first they whispered, "Is this real? Is this the same boy?" But when they learned the truth, that Ethan's breakthrough had come not from a famous doctor, but from the daughter of a housekeeper, the shock was even greater. To some, it was humbling. To others, almost unbelievable. But the evidence was undeniable. Ethan had transformed, and at the center of it all was Lily, the little girl who had done the unthinkable. For years, Daniel had built his image as a man of power, wealth, and control. But now, his heart had changed. At a charity gala months later, he stood before a glittering crowd and confessed something no one expected. For years, I thought money could buy every solution, but I was wrong. My son taught me otherwise, and so did a little girl who showed us the language of love. The audience sat stunned in silence. Many wept. Daniel's reputation, once built on steel and stone, now glowed with humanity. But while the Sterlings found healing, a question lingered. What about Lily? She had given so much, her time, her heart, her gift. But she came from a world far different than Ethan's. Would the bond between them last? Or would the gap between wealth and poverty eventually tear them apart? That answer lay in the days to come. Because while the Sterlings had been changed forever, Lily's life was about to change in ways no one could have predicted.
Though Ethan and Lily had come from different worlds, one the child of unimaginable wealth, the other the daughter of a housekeeper, they now shared something deeper than circumstance. Whenever Lily visited, Ethan's face lit up. He clapped, laughed silently, and ran to greet her with signs he had learned. For Helena, it was beautiful. For Daniel, it was humbling. He couldn't ignore the irony. The daughter of one of his employees had succeeded where the finest specialists had failed. The bond between the children was no longer a fleeting miracle. It was something lasting, something unshakable. At first, some in the Sterling household staff whispered, could it be right for the heir of the Sterling fortune to be so close to the daughter of a servant? But as they watched Lily patiently teaching Ethan, watched his laughter filling the mansion halls, those whispers faded into admiration. Even the butler, always dignified and proper, admitted softly one evening, "She has given this house its soul again." Helena overheard, and tears welled in her eyes. She knew it was true. News of Ethan's transformation spread slowly beyond the mansion gates. Neighbors, friends, and even critics of the Sterlings began to notice changes. At church, Ethan signed along with the choir. At the park, he played with other children for the first time, his gestures clear and full of meaning. Parents watched in awe. Some approached Helena. "My son struggles too," one mother whispered. Do you think sign language could help?" Helena, once isolated and ashamed, now became a source of encouragement. "Don't be afraid to learn their world," she told them. "It may change everything." And it did. Slowly, other families began exploring sign language, inspired by Ethan and Lily's story. Daniel Sterling had built an empire, but he had never truly been a father. Now he found himself racing home from meetings to practice signing with his son. In the evenings, instead of retreating to his office, he sat cross-legged on the floor, fumbling through signs with his son, laughing when he got it wrong. Helena watched quietly, her heart aching with both joy and regret. This is what we were missing all along. Even Daniel's business associates noticed a change. His once cold, sharp demeanor softened. At board meetings, he listened more, spoke less. "Sterling seems human," one rival muttered in disbelief. But for Daniel, none of that mattered. The only victory he cared about was the smile of a little boy who finally felt understood. For Lily, things shifted too. At school, she suddenly became the girl who taught the millionaire's son to talk with his hands. Teachers praised her. Parents looked at her differently. But Lily herself remained unchanged.
When asked how she did it, she shrugged and said simply, "I just listened with my eyes." Yet quietly, the Sterlings began to wonder, how could they ever repay her? One evening, after dinner, Daniel called Lily's mother, Maria, into the study. Helena was beside him, smiling warmly. "Maria," Daniel began, "your daughter has given us something we can never repay, but we want to try." Maria looked nervous, her hands wringing in her apron. "Sir, she only did what came naturally. Please, you don't owe us anything." But Daniel shook his head firmly. "No, we owe her everything, which is why we want to sponsor Lily's education. Every opportunity, every door, she will have it." Maria gasped, her eyes flooding with tears. "You mean?" Helena leaned forward. "A scholarship, the best schools, the best tutors, whatever Lily dreams of, we'll help her get there." Maria covered her mouth. I don't know what to say." Daniel looked at her gently. "Just say yes. She gave our son a voice. We'd like to give her a future." That night, Maria hugged her daughter tightly. "Do you know what you've done, Lily? You've changed lives." Lily blinked in confusion. "I just wanted Ethan to smile." Maria's tears fell into her daughter's hair. Sometimes the smallest kindness is the greatest miracle. And so a new chapter began, not just for Ethan, but for Lily, too. Soon, the story reached beyond the community. A journalist who had once written critical pieces about the Sterlings heard whispers and decided to investigate. He expected scandal. Instead, he found something else, a story of transformation, humility, and the unlikely friendship of two children. When the article was published, the silent language that saved a millionaire's son, it spread like wildfire. People everywhere were touched. Emails poured in. Strangers shared their own struggles with misunderstood children. Organizations advocating for the deaf community reached out, offering resources, praising the family for embracing Ethan's true world. The Sterlings, once the subject of gossip, now became a symbol of hope. But with the attention came pressure. Some accused Daniel of using the story to polish his image. Others sneered that it was just good PR. Daniel could have fought back, but instead, he did something unexpected. He donated millions to schools for the deaf. He funded programs that taught sign language to families for free, and he gave credit not to himself, but to a little girl named Lily. At a press conference, when asked why, he simply said, "Because no parent should wait years to understand their child, and because love, not money, is the greatest investment." For Helena, the change was personal, not public. She no longer walked through the mansion halls heavy with dread. She no longer feared bedtime. Instead, she cherished every small conversation with Ethan, every moment of connection. At night, she often stood in Ethan's doorway, watching him sleep peacefully. No cries, no restlessness, just peace. And she whispered, "Thank you, Lily," before closing the door. Her heart, once heavy with failure, was now full of gratitude. By now, Ethan was signing fluently for his age. He asked questions, told stories with his hands, and even teased his parents. One evening, as the sun set, Ethan climbed into his father's lap. Slowly, deliberately, he signed 3 words: "I forgive you." Daniel's heart shattered and healed all at once. He hugged his son tightly, whispering into his boy's hair, "And I'll never stop trying to deserve that." The Sterlings had been changed. Lily's life had been uplifted. The community had learned to see children differently. But this story wasn't just about them. It was about every misunderstood child, every family struggling in silence, every parent searching for answers in all the wrong places. And it was about the reminder that sometimes the most profound truths are spoken not with words, but with love. Yet even as joy blossomed, a quiet question lingered. Would Ethan and Lily's bond survive the passage of time, the weight of expectations, the difference in their worlds? Because while miracles can change lives, only time can prove if they last. And that test was coming sooner than anyone expected.
Time, as it always does, moved forward. Ethan was no longer the crying boy who once shook the mansion with his sorrow. He was growing tall, his hands quick and expressive, his laughter silent but radiant. The Sterling mansion, once filled with despair, now pulsed with warmth. Walls that at once echoed with unanswered cries now held conversations in the graceful dance of hands. And at the center of it all remained Lily, no longer just the little girl who stumbled into Ethan's world, but his friend, his teacher, his sister in spirit. As Ethan grew, so did his bond with Lily. They studied together, played together, dreamed together. There were moments when their worlds seemed impossibly different, his filled with privilege, hers with modest simplicity, but somehow that difference never mattered. Because when they sat together, signing with bright eyes and giggles, the rest of the world disappeared. One afternoon, as they sat under the grand oak tree on the Sterling estate, Ethan signed slowly, "You saved me." Lily's eyes widened. She shook her head and signed back, "No, you saved yourself. I just listened." Their hands froze midair, and then they both burst into quiet laughter. Daniel and Helena had been transformed as much as their son. Helena no longer carried the shadow of failure. She had embraced Ethan's world fully, mastering sign language until she could converse fluently with him. The once distant mother had become his greatest advocate. Daniel, too, was unrecognizable. The ruthless businessman had been softened, reshaped by the humbling truth his son had taught him. One evening at dinner, Ethan signed "Love You" across the table. Daniel, without hesitation, signed it back. Helena's eyes filled with tears. The family that had once been fractured was whole again. Though the Sterlings could have hidden their story, they chose to share it. They funded deaf education, sponsored schools, and gave platforms to families who had once felt voiceless. Documentaries were made, articles written. Ethan and Lily's story traveled farther than they could have imagined. And though the attention sometimes felt overwhelming, Daniel reminded himself of one simple truth. If their story helped even one more child find their voice, it was worth it. The scholarship Daniel had promised was more than words. Lily thrived in school. Her natural gift for languages, both spoken and signed, earned her recognition. Years later, when asked what she wanted to be, she smiled and said, "A teacher, because every child deserves to be understood." Helena, sitting beside her, whispered proudly, "She was always meant for this." By the time Ethan was a teenager, he no longer defined himself by silence. He excelled in academics, discovered a love for art, and even gave speeches, through interpreters, that moved audiences to tears. At one such event, standing before a hall full of parents and children, Ethan signed, "I cried for years because no one could hear me. Then one girl did, and that changed everything." The crowd rose to its feet in thunderous applause. Helena wept openly. Daniel, his arm around her, whispered, "That's my boy." One quiet evening, years after that first miraculous breakthrough, Daniel found himself alone in the garden with Lily. She was older now, poised, confident, but her eyes still carried the same warmth. "Lily," he said softly, "there's something I've never said properly." She tilted her head. "I need to tell you that you didn't just save Ethan. You saved me. You reminded me that love is greater than wealth, that listening is greater than speaking. I'll never forget that." Lily's eyes shimmered as she signed back, "And I'll never forget him." They stood there in silence, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Looking back, it was almost impossible to believe. A mansion once haunted by a child's cries had become a sanctuary of love. A boy once dismissed as unreachable had become a voice for countless others. A little girl once overlooked had become the key that unlocked it all. And the greatest lesson was this: miracles don't always come as thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come as a quiet child raising her hands and daring to listen when no one else will. As this story closes, one truth lingers. A truth not just for the Sterlings, not just for Ethan and Lily, but for every one of us. Sometimes the answers we seek aren't found in power, money, or authority. They're found in compassion, in patience, in the willingness to step into someone else's world, even if it's unfamiliar. Because the greatest language we all share isn't spoken. It isn't written. It's love. And when love is expressed, even silently, it can heal wounds no one thought possible. So the next time you encounter someone who seems unreachable, remember Ethan and Lily. Remember that silence doesn't mean absence. And remember that sometimes the unthinkable is possible if we only dare to listen.